it's going to lead to our next conversation here, because I think increasingly there's been this ongoing battle, ongoing for like the last 3 decades, with the CIO, the office of the CIO, the functional role, fighting to become more and more strategic. And I think part of the challenge, part of the reason that we're still having this conversation after 2 or 3 decades, is because I don't know if there's been agreement on what that really meant. I think for a lot of CIOs, it simply meant they wanted to have a seat at the adult table, so to speak, when the overall decisions of the organization were being made in that sort of level. But most of the work, the day-to-day work of the CIO, was actually still in in the act of fulfilling the mission of the organization, not setting it, right? It was, how do I support all the other divisions within the organization, all the functional units, and make that work? And so the strategic play in most cases was, I want to be at the table when those conversations are being had, so I can tell you whether or not we can support that, or maybe even throw some ideas out there about how you can leverage technology to transform the way you're working. But this is sort of now leading, right, to a different sort of conversation, where now suddenly, because tech spend is such a huge part of the enterprise budget and it has such ramifications for the enterprise's state of competitiveness, that a decision like this is, do I start stockpiling resources because we're concerned about tariffs, becomes a truly strategic, business strategic sort of conversation. And what I think is interesting about it is it sort of leads into what is obviously a political move, but perhaps a sign of things changing from the White House attempting to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm understanding what you sent over, attempting to convert the CIO position within federal agencies, which has historically been I guess, deemed a career position, to that of being a political appointee, which would imply that sort of policy angle. Am I getting that right?
That's right. So the Trump administration put out a memo last week, basically stating that they are redesignating the CIO position from a career track position to a political appointee situation, with the logic that CIOs have increasingly been able to implement policy that is contrary to what was originally put in place. Now, my political cynicism says this is a play to go against diversity, equity, inclusion, all that stuff, that the political football around being socially conservative. But I also think there's an interesting point here around what the CIO's role is in enacting policy. To what extent does the Trump administration actually think that the CIOs have been able to push policy, and how is that reflective of how CIOs work in the rest of the world? Because there's always been these different schools of CIOs, as you mentioned before. The CIOs who just want a seat at the table and are order takers, versus the CIOs who are able to work independently and say, okay, this is my budget, and you're trying to do this, and I'm going to use creative ways to make that happen. There are definitely CIOs on both sides of that, along that spectrum, and it's obvious that the Trump administration wants to go to order takers that are appointed, and I think
Well,
that kind of
I think
shows in
that's
the
interesting.
CIO that they picked last week, which we were not super impressed with.
So I think yeah. So I think there's two ways, or two dimensions you have to look at this with. I think clearly, with the Trump administration, this looks like a power grab. Yet another power grab, another way to install people there that are going to be loyal to the Trump administration. So okay, take that for what it's worth, but set that aside for a moment. And I do think it is indicative of a pretty monumental shift, I think. And let's talk about something we haven't talked about a lot, mostly I think because we just couldn't stomach it. But we talked about when Elon Musk was appointed to Doge, and when they took the digital, I always forget, the digital service, the whatever, and they
Yes.
renamed it Doge. And we sort of talked about it, where it's like, oh well, this is a sign of how it was a lot of talk, and it was sort of toothless, and this was really, now they're just technology, renovation and modernization, and we were wrong. I mean, we were pretty wrong on that, because what we
Mhm.
found instead is that Elon Musk, and vis-a-vis Elon Musk, the Trump administration, recognize that the keys to the kingdom were in the technology, that by using that as the pathway in, they could effectively seize control of these organizations. They didn't need to go through the policy work. They could just literally, grab it by the digital, fill it in, and
Yes.
take a stranglehold of these federal agencies. And so to me, this is sort of the the codification of that, of saying we want to install the technology leader as a political appointee, because that technology leader has the ability to effectively has the keys to the kingdom. And so taking it again out of the sort of the Trump power grab part of this, from a CIO perspective, I think that's a sort of like a moment of awakening. It's like, yeah, within every organization, you're more than just a caretaker. You have a very prominent role, because everything now runs through that tech stack. And so it's just sort of an interesting development that in the long run, take the nefariousness out, could actually be a very good thing for the CIO as a career position.
At the very least, it shows that we've said as a cliche, it's all about the data. Now, even the federal government realizes it's all about the data. And although I'm not a big fan of this end run around Congress and 50 years of digital law and all sorts of things that I could rant about for hours, I will say that this past couple of weeks have definitely shown without a doubt that access to protected computer systems and personal data is a vital part of the power of the federal government. The data matters, the transactions matter, and that access has definitely become one of the biggest political stories of our recent times, and that's a little bit surprising when you think about how data and computers were just sort of this seen as this niche thing, even relatively recently from a government perspective. Now the data is the government.
It is fascinating. I think that the big takeaway, if you ever wanted to be a government CIO, book your ticket to Florida right now, and go
Chat up
make a visit to
Mar-a-Lago.
Mar-a-Lago.
Yep. Yes.